What's going on, guys? We are less than 2 months from the start of college basketball, and today we are going to be looking at Tennessee and how their roster shapes up ahead of the 2024-25 season, and some predictions for how they will do in conference and non-conference play during the regular season. So let's get into it. Coach Rick Barnes is back for his 10th season in Knoxville, and it's been a very successful tenure, especially the last 3 or 4 seasons for Rick Barnes. Last season was arguably his best. They finished 27-9, 14-4, which was first in SEC play. They lost their only SEC tournament game, however, but did bounce back and have a solid NCAA tournament run where they made it to the Elite Eight and lost to Purdue. And they had just an excellent team last year. I thought there was a clear, top tier of UConn, Purdue, and Houston last year, but I would say Tennessee was in that tier just below those three teams. And the reason for that is they had a tremendous performance from their transfer, Dalton Knecht, who came in from Northern Colorado and just immediately took over. And he was outstanding from the start of the season to the end of the season. And he was exactly what Tennessee needed. They brought back, I would say, the spine of the team from a good team the year before, a team that made it to the Sweet 16. And they were just lacking like an offensive weapon, a true scorer. And Knecht just was that missing piece for Tennessee. And it was awesome to see how the team really fit around him. And then also how he was just, like I said, that missing piece for the team. So when we're looking at the roster here, we're going to start with who left, then we'll go into who's back, and then who's new. So who's gone? Obviously, Dalton Knecht has made his way to the Los Angeles Lakers. Good for him. Also, some stalwarts in Santiago Vescovi and Josiah Jordan James, fifth-year guys, are now out of eligibility and have moved on. And, two guys who Vescovi kind of had to take a step back last season with Knecht and didn't quite figure out his role, but he was still a guy who Rick Barnes could certainly rely upon and knew what he was going to get from Vescovi. And similar things could certainly be said with Josiah Jordan James, who is like a Swiss Army knife forward for Tennessee, who could defend, make some plays for teammates, and score a little bit. Wasn't really like great at any one thing, but could do a lot of different things. And then I would say, arguably, more importantly, just because, the first three guys were out of eligibility, so Coach Barnes and his staff were certainly preparing for how to fill their shoes. But I would say the next two players who left via the transfer portal, at least to me, were a little bit of a surprise. In Jonas Adu and Tobe Awaka transferring respectively to Arkansas and Arizona. And Tennessee fans, let me know in the comments below whether you thought those transfers were a surprise or not to you. But to me, as a college basketball fan, kind of a neutral observer, did not see that coming. I thought Adu, was a guy who I watched as a sophomore, and I could see take a step forward without Plavsic there as a starter, and I thought he did so. Now, the only thing I will say that maybe made it a little bit of less of a surprise for me personally was that in the tournament game against Purdue, Adu, not only did he not play well, but his body language, to me, wasn't good in that game. He really struggled with the matchup against Zach Edey, and because of foul trouble to both Adu and Awaka, they ended up having to play the freshman JP Estrella a lot more than they had probably anticipated going into that game. So you've lost both of your big men and the majority of your starting five outside of one key player, which is where we'll start with the players who've returned to Tennessee next season, and that's Zakai Ziegler. I know Dalton Knecht was their best player and certainly their leading scorer and all of those good things, but one could argue that Zakai Ziegler was maybe not the most important player, but the guy who kind of was the leader of the team, the spark plug of the team. He would guard people, the length of the court. He could get guys involved. He shot the three a bit better last season than he did previously. And while he's undersized, he almost uses it to his advantage. Like, he does a really good job of getting underneath ball handlers and just making things very uncomfortable. And he's just a really good college point guard. And then additionally, Jemai Meshack is back, who personally I really like Meshack. I know he's not a great shooter, but he just provides energy and defense that is needed on most teams. Pretty much all teams, quite frankly, need somebody like that. And then Jordan Gainey's back. I think he's a solid guard, and he's somebody who I'm interested to see whether his role is going to expand or whether it will stay somewhat similar to what it was last season. Lastly, in terms of notable players that are returning as far as I'm concerned, JP Estrella, as I mentioned before, got some more playing time in that game against Purdue, and is a guy who I think will be part of the rotation. Whether he'll start or come off the bench, we'll get into in a little bit, but I certainly expect him to be part of the rotation. And then I'm curious, Tennessee fans, let me know in the comments below. I didn't really think much of guys like Cade Phillips and Cameron Carr, but I'm curious whether you guys think those guys could kind of break out a little bit and become part of the rotation next season. Now, who's new? First off, Chaz Lanier from the University of Northern Florida is the Dalton Knecht replacement. He's a little bit smaller, but I think as far as the role that's being envisioned for him, he's going to be the leading scorer for Tennessee. He shot, I think it was 6 or 7 3-pointers per game at Northern Florida last season and hit them at a decent clip. So he's going to be relied upon to get shots up, get threes up, and be that leading scorer for Tennessee next season. Felix Okpara comes in from Ohio State. He'll bring that shot blocking presence to Tennessee, and I think there's a decent chance he'll either start or come off the bench. Again, we'll get into that in a second here. Igor Milicic Jr., he's a 6'10 forward from Charlotte, and Darlington Dubar is a 6'8, I would say like small forward, more so than anything, from Hofstra. And those are the 4 big transfers that were brought in. And then Bishop Boswell is a freshman who is, in the top 100, either like mid-60s on ESPN or mid-90s on 24/7 Sports. And he's a combo guard, about 6'4", and I'm not sure he'll be part of the rotation, but he'll certainly be just on the outside of that rotation. And speaking of the rotation, I think now's a good time to start looking at that. So I think when I was looking at Tennessee's roster, who I thought could be part of the starting lineup in the rotation overall, there were some things that I thought were very clear, and there were others that were a little bit more undecided as far as I was concerned. So the things that were clear, I think their starting guards are clear as day. It's going to be Zakai Ziegler and Chaz Lanier. And then outside of that, the starting lineup, the next 3 spots, there's competition between 5 guys for those 3 spots, as far as I see it. And I think it's going to be rounded out like this. I think Jemai Meshack is going to start at the 3. I think Igor Milicic is going to start at the 4. When I looked at his numbers, he shot, I think, like 3.5 threes per game. I know he's 6'10", so initially I thought he was another center, but I think he also played as a 4 at Charlotte, so I think he can play at the 4 for Tennessee. And then Felix Okpara, I think, is going to start at center over JP Estrella, who I think will get minutes, but I think it will be more in like the 15 minutes per game, and Okpara will get like 25. And then I think the bench is going to be, I think JP Estrella is the 8th guy, so guys 6 and 7, I think, are going to be Jordan Gainey and Darlington Dubar. I think Dubar, of those 3, has the best chance to become a starter over a guy like Jemai Meshack. And then also, depending on how Milicic does at the 4, maybe Tennessee looks to play a little bit smaller, and they have Dubar and Meshack start together instead of a guy like Milicic. So that's kind of how I see the starting lineup in rotation for Tennessee next season. But I do think there's a few combinations that Coach Barnes and his staff can go with next year. Now, moving ahead to the the schedule and predictions for next season. And they have, an interesting non-conference slate. And the first thing that jumped out to me is, I know they're in the SEC, but man, they're playing a lot of ACC schools. They play on the road at Louisville. They're going to play Virginia in a short tournament in the Bahamas, where they'll play Virginia and then either Baylor or St. John's. So 2 good games there. I guess depending on how Virginia rebounds this year. They'll play Syracuse in the SEC ACC Challenge, and then they'll play Miami in the Jimmy V Classic at Madison Square Gardens. You've got 4 ACC games for Tennessee in the non-conference schedule. And then the last notable non-conference game, Illinois. They play at Illinois. And Illinois and Coach Brad Underwood, I've done a few of these videos so far, and he's on several teams' schedule early on. Like, I don't know how much more difficult Illinois' schedule could be, but they've made it as challenging as seemingly could be. But this is a video about Tennessee. And so going into the conference portion of their schedule, there's 18 conference games in the SEC, and they'll play Kentucky, Florida, and Vanderbilt, home and away. And then at home, they'll play Arkansas, Georgia, Mississippi State, Missouri, and Alabama. And on the road, they'll play Florida, Texas, Vanderbilt, Auburn, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Texas A&M, LSU, and Ole Miss. Yes, I mentioned Kentucky, Florida, and Vanderbilt twice. Sorry about that. But you guys get the point. It is a daunting schedule that Tennessee has. The SEC has really improved over the last, let's say, 10 years in basketball. And this year they're set up to be a really tough conference to play in. And so with that being said, predictions for next season. So last year Tennessee went 10-3 in the non-conference portion of the schedule. And while I do think it is a tough non-conference schedule, I think they're going to finish the same, 10-3. I think last year they had some weird kind of things happen non-conference wise. I think they can finish similarly. The one thing that I will say before I move into the conference portion of the schedule is that Tennessee last season I felt like returned the spine of their team. This year they return like the heart and soul in Zakai Ziegler and Jemai Mashak, but they have a lot more pieces that they've got to fill in from the previous season than they did last year. So 10-3 might be a little bit optimistic as far as I'm concerned. But that's what I'm rolling with. I do think, though, that they won't be quite as good in the SEC. And for that, I am going to have them at 12-6. And so that gives them a regular season record of 22-9. And I think that'll be good enough to get them certainly an at-large bid. And from there, anything's really possible. This is a team that on paper has all the pieces to be a very good team. But like I said just before, there are questions about how the pieces are going to fit together and how will some of these guys do transferring like up a level. And I'm talking about specifically Chaz Lanier, Igor Milicic Jr., and Darlington Dubar. But let me know in the comments below, what do you guys think about Tennessee heading into next season? What other teams do you want to see me profile here? We've got, like I said, just under 2 months before the season starts. Please like this video. It helps the channel grow. Subscribe for more great college basketball and NBA draft content. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.